village that cried. One day last August, nearly from the moment I woke, I began thinking of a World War II incident my father had shared with me many years earlier. All morning as I went about my household chores, I was haunted by that story. Finally, I sat down at my computer and typed into my search engine a few key words that I hoped would bring me the information I was seeking. Though the story was burned in my memory, I couldn't remember specific details. I could only recall Dad's face, relating to me the sad tale of a bomber's failed attempt to return to the aerodrome where he had been stationed in England, of the huge plane crashing into a school in the nearby village and killing the children. It was the first time I had seen my father cry. My search almost immediately brought results. Since I knew where Dad had been stationed, at Base Air Depot No. 2, Wharton, England, I had no difficulty in ferreting out the story he had shared with me. BAD-2 Wharton was established under the 8th Air Force Service Command, 5 September 1942. Its mission, the modification and repair of military aircraft. Warplanes from the U.S. were adapted to meet special requirements of the European Theater of Operations. Battle-damaged aircraft were repaired, sometimes whole sections rebuilt. By summer 1944, there were 10,000 Americans at Wharton, working round the clock to keep those planes over Germany. My father among them. Freckleton before the war was a sleepy Lancashire hamlet near Wharton and Preston on England's northwest coast, by the Irish Sea and on the banks of the River Ripple. At the outbreak of World War II, Freckleton had less than 1,000 people, had till over 10,000 RAF and U.S. Army Air Force servicemen and women, in addition to evacuee children from London and Manchester, came for the duration. As the result of the horrific air disaster, this English community was christened by the media the village that cried. The tragedy occurred on a Wednesday morning, 23 August 1944. Sitting at my desk last summer, uncovering the facts about this story my father had long ago shared with me, I checked the date on the toolbar in the lower right-hand corner of my computer to discover that it was 23 August. I glanced at the clock. It was 10:47. That was, according to the data I had just pulled from the BBC website, the exact time the clock on the wall in the infant's wing of Freckleton's Holy Trinity School had stopped when the huge plane hit. I knew then my father was asking me to write about this, the greatest single loss of civilian life in Britain, outside of London, during the Second World War. Dad never talked about this to anyone else in the family. Back then, I had not begun writing history, but my father and I most certainly bonded in our love and appreciation of history. Young as I was, I sensed keenly that it was difficult for Dad, who had helped with the rescue and recovery, to talk about the tragedy. The morning of 23 August, 1944, dawned bright and clear in the Freckleton area, but long about 9:30 a.m., the sky darkened as a storm rolled in from the Irish Sea. Rain poured down in a deluge, accompanied by great and frequent cracks of vivid lightning, forked lightning, that seemed to rent the very sky. Ear-shattering blasts of thunder triggered screams from the children in the school and sent their hands flying to their ears, whilst along the coast, the sea rushed to batter the shore with towering waves as the storm built to what witnesses called supernatural intensity. The winds kicked up to a 60-mile-an-hour gale with 70-mile gusts. Suddenly, the sky went pitch black. It was so dark, the lights in the school were put on. In Holy Trinity's infants wing, what we term preschool and kindergarten, the children ranged in age from 4 to 6, just the day before they had started school, and welcomed a new teacher, Miss Jenny Hall, a 21-year-old local girl who was filling in for Miss Doris Catlow, the regular teacher whose mother was ill. Assembly was over, and at their little desks, the children had just received instruction of the lesson they were to do that morning. As the raging storm intensified, boisterous in its fury, the wild winds howled and whipped round the school building, rattling the doors and windows forcefully, as though something dark and sinister were trying to break in. The younger children in the infants' wing became especially frightened. Thus, Miss Hall decided to calm them by reading aloud a story. With slightly trembling fingers, she picked up a fairy book and slipped on her spectacles. Meanwhile, at 10:30 hours, B-24 Liberator H-20 4250291 was cleared for takeoff from Wharton's runway 08. Classy Chassis 2 had been brought to the U.S. Army Air Force Base No. 2 for refurbishment, prior to being allocated to the 2nd Combat Division. On this day, she was being test flown before resuming service, and this task fell to First Lieutenant John Blumendahl, one of BAD-2's regular test pilots, with T. Sergeant Jimmy Parr as co-pilot and Sergeant Gordon Kinney as flight engineer. The takeoff was uneventful, and the B-24 headed out over the pastoral Lancashire countryside, accompanied by a second B-24, 421353, being test flown by First Lieutenant Pete Manacero. Over the radio, Blumendahl called Manacero's attention to the cloud formation toward the south-southeast. It was an imposing sight and looked like a thunderhead, according to Manacero. Less than 5 minutes after the B-24s left Wharton, a telephone call reached the base from BAD-1 Burtonwood, about 30 miles south, warning of a violent storm approaching the Preston area. They were told the storm was a bad one and was closing in fast, with heavy rain and wind seriously reducing visibility. Immediately, an order was issued recalling both aircrafts out for test flights. This is the actual dialogue from the Wharton Control Tower to First Lieutenant John Blumendahl's and to First Lieutenant Pete Manacero's Liberators.
Hello, Gorgeous John and Gorgeous Pete. This is Farm Control. Are you receiving? Over.
Hello, Control. This is Gorgeous John. Over.
Hello, Gorgeous John and Gorgeous Pete. This is Control. You are to land immediately. Land immediately. Over.
Hello, Control. This is Gorgeous John. Can you give reason? Is it the weather?
Roger that. Ceiling and visibility decreasing rapidly. You are clear and number 1 to land on runway 08.
Gorgeous John, roger. Control.
By the time the two B-24s arrived back over Wharton, the storm had assumed the supernatural quality previously mentioned. Ground witnesses related that the rain was so heavy it was impossible to see across the road. Lightning flashed incessantly, and thunder rolled loudly across the ominous sky. The wind, by this time, was of such ferocity that it was uprooting trees and smashing henhouses and other buildings on nearby farms. The sky had turned that portentous black, plunging the whole district into darkness, even though it was a midsummer's day, making it impossible to see indoors without the aid of artificial light. Though the official report states that no further radio contact was made by Blumendahl with Control, radio conversations monitored by Wharton's tower suggest that the two B-24 pilots had abandoned their attempts to land and were heading north to hold clear until the storm abated. Manacero was flying on Blumendahl's right wing, approximately 100 yards away. And here I'll let Pete tell the story in his own words.
As we drew near the field, I drew further out to be in position to land as number 2. We let down to 500 feet, and about 4 miles northwest of the field, we encountered heavy rain that became heavier with less visibility as we neared the approach to runway 08. On the base leg position, Lieutenant Bowmandow let down his gear, and I did same. Shortly after this, I lost sight of Blomendell's aircraft. As I flew over Lytham, I started a left turn to begin the approach. At this time, I heard Lieutenant Blomendell notify Farm Control that he was pulling up the wheels and going round. I was then over the wash, could not see the ground, and had to fly on instruments. I called to Lieutenant Blomendell and told him we'd better head north and get out of the storm. He answered okay. I told him I'd take a heading of about 330 degrees. He answered Roger. That was the last time I heard from Lieutenant Blomendell. I flew about 4 or 5 minutes before breaking out of the storm. I then called Blomendell and asked if he was okay, but I got no reply. There was only silence. Eyewitness accounts illuminate the last moments of the ill-fated B-24. Like almost everyone else in Freckleton, they were all watching the storm. Charlotte Alsop was at the back of her house, Poplars, on Clitheroe Lane, desperately trying to get her chickens out of the rain. I looked in a northerly direction. The storm was at its fiercest. Rain was teeming down. I saw a great ball of fire in the sky, flash, then hit the plane. The plane spun down and hit the earth. That ball of fire was lightning. Vera Cartmel was standing in the window of her house at 30 Kirkham Road, looking at the storm with her 2-year-old daughter June when she saw the Liberator. It was flying so low, I felt it would crash. I tried to follow it but couldn't see it anymore. I heard the crash, however, and then saw the smoke. Across the road, a visitor at number 21, 8-year-old Eric Greenwood, was standing at the window, looking out toward the fields.
I saw the Liberator and heard its roar right over the house. It was flying very low, and I saw the right wing go down as the left came up. The plane seemed to be swaying in the air. A moment afterwards, I heard a loud crash.
Lieutenant Blomendell struggled, fought to keep his plane in the air. The ferociously high winds with its treacherous gusts and downdrafts made control of the Liberator difficult, and violent turbulence buffeted the plane. The B-24's fate was sealed when it listed to its side, one wing straight up, the other straight down. In that position, there was no recovery. Already flying low to the ground, with its wings now vertical, the B-24 ripped the top from a tree, shedding its right wingtip as it sheared off the corner of a building, leaving the rest of the wing careening along the ground through a hedge. The 25-ton bomber, and that's a lot of plane, plunged on, partly demolishing 3 houses and pulverizing the Sad Sack snack bar, its powerful momentum hurling it across Lytham Road, where it finally disintegrated into a violent inferno. Part of the plane destroyed the infants' wing of Freckleton's Holy Trinity School. As the fuel from the bomber's ruptured tanks ignited, the entire annex erupted into a hellish scene, the fires burning long after the crash. Incredibly, a classroom clock registered 10:47. Someone once said that nothing is as far away as 1 minute ago, for time is a hurried peddler who deals in dust. William Banks, an employee at Freckleton Post Office, reported looking out into the street.
I saw the tail of the plane in the road in front of the school. As I was looking, almost instantaneously, the infant's wing, highway, and the plane all burst into flames. I ran out toward the fire, but the heat was too intense to get close.
On the opposite side of the road, Mrs. S.J. Rocky was in a showroom of St. Anne's Corporation. The street was ablaze. I could see Whittle's Bar, the sad sack, aflame. I couldn't see the school because of the fire, but I could hear the children screaming. A sound that for her and many others would chillingly echo down the long tunnel of time. In a BBC radio broadcast on the 65th anniversary of the tragedy, Ruby Curl, one of only 3 children to ultimately survive the disaster, remembered the moment the plane hit the school and all hell broke loose. It was a terrifying experience. Ruby told me, too, that she experienced a gripping fear of going to school that day. One other child, at least, shared that dread. Little June Stewartson had been awake most of the night and, after eventually falling into a fitful sleep, woke screaming from a terrible nightmare. Diving under her desk, Ruby witnessed the teacher, Jenny Hall, violently propelled backward, as several of her classmates, too, were hurled head over heels. She remembered a bright orange flash and the explosion when the bomber's 2,700 gallons of fuel erupted into a giant fireball. In the main building of Holy Trinity School, the older children burst out the door to find the whole area ablaze from the plane's tanks. They could not exit the grounds their usual way, but had to turn left and clamber over a stone wall. For though the rest of the school was still standing, they had to get to safety quickly. Rushing to the scene, American soldiers wrapped their own tunics and coats round the children against the rain, lifting many over the high wall to safety. In the village, rescuers converged on the scene from every direction. Thick, acrid smoke and a powerful smell of aviation fuel and burning flesh infused the air. Young American airmen clawed the debris at the scene of impact with bare hands, including my father, attempting to rescue children. Sadly and tragically, their valiant rescue mission soon became a recovery search. First responders on the scene wound up in the base infirmary with severely burned hands, feet, and arms. Then, as rapidly as it had roared in, the severest thunderstorm the base and many of the villagers had ever experienced suddenly vanished. From the smoldering remains of the firestorm that was the infants' classroom, 7 children and 1 teacher were rushed to the base hospital, though only a badly burned Ruby Curl and 2 little boys would survive. The others passed away the following week, including teacher Louisa Holm, and at her request, she was buried with the children in the communal grave in Holy Trinity Churchyard. 38 children, a whole generation of that village's little ones lost. Those folks sheltering from the storm in the Sad Sack snack bar stood no chance. That building took the full force of the bomber's impact. Rescuers uncovered from the debris the bodies of 7 United States Army Air Force and 4 RAF, together with the cafe owners and a number of civilians. The total death toll was 61. In the wake of the disaster, Freckleton children knew if they were outside when a storm hit, they could knock on any door and be welcomed without question. In those long past days, there was no counseling. Sadness, loss, tragedies of all kinds were sorted out by families, some with the help of clergy, most with their strong faith in God. The American authorities immediately picked up the entire cost of the mass burial. American servicemen from Wharton acted as pallbearers, carrying each small casket, shoulder high, the procession making its somber way through the village, past 2 tall flagpoles, where waved a Union Jack and Old Glory, side by side, both at half-mast. A mountain of wreaths in the shape of a cross was piled behind the communal grave. The American servicemen of BAD-2 also sought to place a fitting memorial in the village. Thus, they set to work, transforming a section of land into a memorial garden and, appropriately, a children's playground. These U.S. servicemen raised all the money entirely on their own for the equipment on the playground that was dedicated in August 1945, with a stone tablet bearing the poignant inscription, "This playground presented to the children of Freckleton by their neighbors of Base Air Depot No. 2, United States Army Air Force, in recognition and remembrance of their common loss in the disaster of August 23, 1944. I wrote this piece about the Freckleton calamity first and foremost because I keenly believe my father wanted me to. Moreover, I wrote it because somewhere in the far-flung land of Connellsville memories, there's someone who can add to this compelling story. Someone who served or knew someone who served in the mighty 8th, the 8th Army Air Force at Base Air Depot No. 2, Wharton, England. And thirdly, I wrote this because doing so has helped me to reconnect with my dear father, who passed away in 1994. I have a keen Irish feeling he'll be with me at the Freckleton Memorial Ceremony this August. World War II Freckleton was known as Little America for the 10,000 Americans with the United States Army Air Force stationed there. As soon as the air disaster occurred, the Americans from the base galvanized into action, doing everything in their power to rescue, recover, console, and aid in any and every way they could the good people of Freckleton. Together they shared the heartbreak and sorrow, an imperishable bond that continues to this day. The crash came as Paris was liberated by the Allies, but the men stationed at Wharton and the folks of that obscure English village were scarcely aware of it. The Freckleton Air Disaster was no one's fault. It was a terrible accident, an utterly tragic event within the greater tragedy of war. I know my father never got over it, and I can tell you that even after all those many decades, when he shared that story with me, his eyes filled with tears, remembering the village that cried.